Welcome to the Pursuit of Wellbeing. My name's Maria Brosnan. I'm the founder of Pursuit and your host for the show. We're dedicated to providing wellbeing information, inspiration and support for teachers, leaders and school staff around the world. My guest today is Frederika Roberts. Frederika is a speaker, trainer, author and occasional lecturer in positive and character education and positive psychology. She's passionate about supporting schools in enabling individuals and communities to flourish. And to this end, she's completed her Master's in Applied Positive Psychology and is undertaking a doctorate in education to underpin her work in schools. Frederika is also the founder and managing director of Educate to Flourish, CIC, a not-for-profit organisation set up to support children's flourishing during and beyond their years in education. Frederika, welcome to the podcast.
Good morning, good afternoon, whenever people are listening, and thank you so much for having me on your podcast, Maria. Absolute pleasure.
Yeah, thank you. Well, let's just jump in. I know your special area is talking about character strengths. So let's start there and perhaps start by defining it. When you talk about character strengths, what do you mean and how can it support our well-being?
Well, that's a very good place to start because there are different kind of schools of thought when it comes to character strengths. So if you look, for example, at the work of the Jubilee Centre for Character and Virtues based at the University of Birmingham, they take a very philosophical approach to character strengths, and it's very much a virtue ethics-based approach. If you look at character strengths from a positive psychology perspective, which is where I come from, there is a lot of overlap there, but it really is about character strengths from the perspective of underpinning well-being and psychological well-being and happiness. And so that's the perspective I take because my specialty, as you said in the introduction, is positive psychology. So I look at it from there, and the most well-known and well-researched character strengths work in that area is from the VIA Institute. So your listeners can go to viacharacter.org and have a look at that. It's a completely free website. And the VIA Institute basically came out of Seligman and Peterson's research, and the research is now ongoing. So it's been spanning for decades. And every time you go online and do a free character strengths inventory test on there, which they have an adult one and they also have an adolescent one on there that people can do. And for any teachers listening as well, you can register as a teacher and get your pupils to do it so that they don't have to input their email addresses. So you can create an account so that your class can do the inventory quite safely on there as well. And every time you do that, it actually continues to contribute to the research. So the research on the character strengths that they've done is really fascinating. Basically, they looked at around the world at people of different ethnicities, religions, ages, genders, etc. And what they found is that we all, as humans, basically share a core set of character strengths, of 24 character strengths. And what I find really interesting when I talk to children in particular about character strengths in schools is that as soon as you say to them, what are your character strengths, they go to, what am I good at? So they start talking about, well, I'm good at football, or I'm good at reading, or, quite often they go to, what am I not good at as well? So I'm rubbish at maths and all of that kind of thing. But actually character strengths are so much more than that. They're not what am I good at? They are who am I? What makes me who I am and what makes me a great person. And I find it fantastic to think that actually no matter who we are, no matter our upbringing, our age, no matter where we are in the world, our cultural background, we all share these 24 strengths that make us awesome in our very unique ways, because what we do have is we all share them in different proportions, of course. And what you can find out when you go to viacharacter.org and do the test there is it gives you them in order. So the top 5 are what the researchers call your signature strengths. So they're the ones that you get the most energy from. They're the ones that really you draw most of your well-being from. They're the ones where you're at your very, very best. So that's kind of a brief-ish explanation of what they are, and then we can talk a bit about how we can use those, I suppose.
I think it would be great to get some, just even some of them. I don't expect you to list off all 24, and we will have links to when you say, is it VIA?
Yes. Yeah,
Right.
so viacharacter.org is the website that you can go to, and they are all listed, of course, with descriptions. But yeah, examples would be things like leadership, for example, is a character strength, teamwork, one that is a bit of a mouthful, but appreciation of beauty and excellence.
Yes.
There are things like spirituality on there, hope, curiosity, so gratitude as well, which is a really interesting one. We can talk about that a bit more because it's both a character strength and an emotion. So it's a really interesting one to kind of look at. But there's 24 on there, and they're grouped. So you have, for example, one group would be temperance, and the temperance group has forgiveness, humility, prudence, and self-regulation in there as character strengths. So what they've done is they've kind of lumped some of them together so that you can look at them as a group as well. And for each group and for each strength, the website gives you some examples of, what they are, how you might see them displayed in yourself and others, and also some simple ideas on how to work on those. But again, that's something that we can talk about obviously during this podcast as well.
Yeah. Well, that seems like a good place to start, because you might think, as you say, and it's very interesting that we can often look to our weaknesses when asked about our strengths. I don't know, what is it about our conditioning that we can see what we're not so good at and what our weaknesses are? But what about somebody that might think, oh, I would love to have more an appreciation, the appreciation of beauty, and how did you describe
excellence?
And excellence. Oh, I'd love to have more of that in my life, but I just don't have it. Is that something that people can develop? So each of these 24 strengths, is it something you can develop more in yourself, or you just have your top 5 or your top 10? How does that work? Can you develop them yourself?
Yeah, absolutely, you can. Now, from a positive psychology perspective, I would always say, it's a really good idea to focus particularly on the ones that are, remember, we've got them all. So even if somebody doesn't feel that they have a particular strength of appreciation of beauty and excellence or creativity, I always used to say that, and a former colleague and still very good friend of mine that I've done a lot of strengths work with and co-authored a book with, used to say, stop saying that you're not creative. You write books, you develop workshops, why do you say you're not creative? And so I stopped saying I'm not creative. What I do realize is I'm not particularly artistic, but there are other ways to be creative. So we all have them. We all have the strengths, but of course it might not be somebody's signature strength. So there is a lot of research that shows that if you particularly hone in on some of your signature strengths and work on developing them, for example, one activity is find 7 new ways to use one of your signature strengths in over 7 days. So you use one of those new ways every day for 7 days. That can actually improve happiness and even reduce symptoms of depression for up to 6 months. So it's a very powerful activity to do. There's probably less research and evidence to say that if you work on your less strong strengths, that's going to give you quite as much benefit. But of course, you might want to develop certain strengths. And as parents and teachers, we may want to occasionally encourage our children to develop certain strengths, such as, for example, self-regulation might be quite a good one. So of course, we can develop certain character strengths. And it's just a case of deliberately focusing on those. So just like you can choose a signature strength and find 7 new ways to use it in 7 days, you can do that for any of your strengths. So it's a really fun challenge to set yourself or to set somebody else, and you can do that particularly well if you're in a school setting as a bit of a competition, as a class. Let's find the most interesting ways to use certain strengths, and over 7 days you just practice 7 new ways of developing that strength. So if you take appreciation of beauty and excellence as an example, it can manifest in so many different ways. Appreciating excellence might just simply be noticing that somebody's done a great job with something. That's a way of appreciating excellence. So one thing could be that one day you're really going to look out for somebody doing things well, and having really practiced the skill of doing something well. And then when you spot that, you go, oh, Paul, I've noticed you've particularly worked hard at that skill. And it could be, that a classmate has worked really hard on their sentence structure, for example, in primary school when they're doing their writing, and you can just spot that even as a classmate. You know, if you're working together on stuff, you might be, I know it's quite difficult with social distancing, but I'm sure teachers will still have ways to get kids to share each other's work, to help each other out and all of that kind of thing, even if it's electronic means. So you can look at someone's work and go, you know, I noticed that you've really worked hard on perfecting your sentence structures and your use of clauses, and that's really shown here. And I think that's a really great way that you've written that sentence. That's appreciation of beauty and excellence.
And I think you can apply that beautifully across colleagues.
Absolutely.
You know, to acknowledge each other for the work, especially when, you know, people are going above and beyond at this time anyway. So it feels like a great way to acknowledge that in your colleagues.
Absolutely, and it's something that we can do, and it's a case of developing the habit to use this kind of language, you know. So yes, certainly with appreciation of beauty and excellence, there are lots of opportunities to recognise excellence in colleagues when they're going above and beyond, as you say. And it could even be something as simple as, you know, a lot of teachers at this time of year will have been normally under different circumstances doing an awful lot to make their classrooms look beautiful, particularly in primary schools, you know, getting all the displays ready. And of course, we have so many restrictions on that, but I'm sure there are a lot of teachers out there that, despite the restrictions, will have done everything they can to make their classroom a really welcoming environment for themselves and for their students, whatever age they are. So that can be recognised under appreciation of beauty and excellence as well. It can sometimes be as simple as saying, I love your new face mask. That's really snazzy. I was in a Zoom meeting yesterday with other educators, and one of them had a fantastic, sparkly, multicolored face mask, and I was like, wow, I love that. You know, that's appreciation of beauty and excellence. But of course, there's all the other strengths as well. So, and you mentioned earlier on something about, you know, how we find it quite difficult to recognize strengths in ourselves, and that is, yes, I don't know what it is about. I think we're kind of hardwired to look for negatives anyway all the time in life, and we kind of apply that to ourselves, sadly, as well. I found it quite interesting whenever I've done workshops on character strengths with school leaders particularly, and you're asking them to identify their top 3 strengths, and they're looking at all these beautiful strengths cards, and they're trying to find, and I go around the groups, and so often the one card that none of these head teachers, academy trust leaders, etc., are picking up is the card for leadership. And you kind of say, come on, think about this, you know, think about what you do for a living. There must be a bit of strength of leadership in there somewhere, you know. So this is how blinkered we can be sometimes to our own strength. And an interesting one is as well that one of the strengths that is one of the 24 VAA strengths is modesty. And of course, nobody picks that strength, because who's going to say with complete modesty and say, oh, I'm really modest, you know? So people tend to be really reticent about choosing that one. But one of the great ways that we can use character strengths and bring that language in is by starting off by spotting them in other people.
Yes.
So if we become familiar with the language of strengths, with what they are, with how they show themselves in people's behavior and actions, then we can start complimenting people on their strengths. And it really is just about starting that, you know, that conversation. Somebody, particularly at this time of year, not this time of year, at this time, you know, people might be showing a lot of hope. You know, this is a very challenging time for so many of us, and yet we're all showing up and turning up and doing our jobs, and so many teachers are doing fantastic work. So just sometimes saying, you know, I notice how even when things have been really rubbish and really challenging, you've never lost hope. That's a great way to spot that strength in somebody. Gratitude is a great one that we can demonstrate and spot in others. There's so much research that's gone into how, you know, for example, writing down 3 good things at the end of the day is very powerful. And again, some of the research on that by Seligman and others has shown that doing that for 7 days can, again, improve happiness and reduce depressive symptoms for up to 6 months, as long as we write it down and we actually write why those things matter to us as well. So we can do that for ourselves, and we can also spot that in others. You know, if somebody's always saying thank you, always going out of their way to notice and appreciate the support of others, we can sometimes pay that back as well and say, you know, I notice that you're always saying thank you to people, you're always showing appreciation, and I just want to pay that back to you and say I appreciate that about you. That's a very simple, I think people sometimes feel a bit awkward about using that kind of language, but the more we do it, the easier it gets, as with anything.
Yeah, and you said earlier that gratitude is interesting because you see it as an emotion and a character strength. Just explain a little bit more about that.
Yes, gratitude is one of those things, you know, we can practice it deliberately as a strength. So we can deliberately write down things that we're grateful for, things that have gone well. We can deliberately pay more attention to showing appreciation to other people for things they do, in the language that we use, in the things that we do. You know, there's lots of little gestures we can have to thank people. So that's using it as a strength. But as an emotion, it's something that doesn't really, that you don't have as much control over. You just get this wave of gratitude happening to you when something good happens. And it's a wonderful positive emotion. And there's a lot of research into positive emotions by Barbara Frederickson and how important they are for our well-being. So whilst we can't control that wave of gratitude that happens to us involuntarily when something good happens, what we can do is actually practice it as a strength, because then it improves and increases our positive emotions as well. So just looking out for good things to be grateful for. And that kind of going slightly into that research of positive emotions, it starts what Barbara Frederickson would refer to as this positive upward spirals of positive emotions. So if we start practicing things that give us positive emotions, such as gratitude, then we experience more gratitude because we're getting more and more positive emotions, and it kind of goes up and up and up. So it's a really wonderful feeling to practice that. But that's what I mean about the difference. It's something that, you know, as an emotion, it just happens to us. When something good happens, we just feel it, and that's not something we can prepare for. It's wonderful when it happens, but we can artificially induce that by practicing it as a strength.
We absolutely can. And I like the gratitude journal, writing down the 3 things that you're grateful for in your day. And I find if I really try to put myself, like replay the video in my mind of those things happening and re-elicit that emotion, it does bring it back. And as you say, it builds on it and builds on it. And it does help really make balance with the challenges in life when we focus on those more positive. I'm always cautious about calling them positive emotions because it implies that difficult emotions are negative, and so I'm always a little bit cautious about that language. Can you talk more about that? How you see the difference between emotions that are, we'll use the words positive and negative, but you know, perhaps more comfortable or uncomfortable. How do you see those?
Yeah, I look at it very much from the perspective that, you know, when we use positive and negative in the context of emotions, it's really just it's not about saying some are good and some are bad. It's about how they make us feel. And so from a psychology perspective, it's really just, you know, positive emotions are the emotions that make us feel great. I would say they give us energy, but sometimes it's not about energy, because actually some negative emotions can be very energetic as well. And, you know, if you take anger, for example, I find anger a fascinating emotion because we tend to associate that with being a negative emotion. You know, it makes us feel tense, and it can be a very, very energetic emotion. But equally, actually, anger can be a very positive emotion if it spurs you on to take action on injustice. So emotions are never just one or the other. And one of the activities I love to do with older children or with teachers is to actually put up a grid where you have basically a vertical axis that has high energy and low energy. So high energy at the top and low energy at the bottom, and then positive on one side and negative on the other. And to try and identify as many emotions as possible. I sometimes do it just by going through the alphabet and let's just come up with, as you know, an emotion for every letter of the alphabet, and then trying to position them as to where they fit on that grid. And what's actually really interesting is not so much where they end up, but the discussions around that, because then you start having conversations about, well, this emotion could be over here, but it could also be over here, depending on how you're experiencing it. So when I talk about positive and negative emotions, it's really just about how they make you feel. And the research on that from Barbara Frederickson, it's not about saying we shouldn't experience negative emotions. Emotions are there for a reason. They're there to alert us to how we're feeling, and we just need to feel them. And we need to, one of the best things we can do for ourselves as adults and for children that we work with is actually to give ourselves the vocabulary of emotions so we can express what it is that we feel. Are we furious, or are we just a little bit miffed? Are we ecstatic, or are we just a little bit, oh, that's interesting that happened? There's a range there, beyond a smiley face and a frowny face. There's so much more that goes between that. So what we can do, starting with children and working on ourselves as adults, is to really understand the vocabulary around that and the granularity of those emotions. But in terms of the positive emotions, what the research is showing is that actually, if whatever else is happening and whatever else is making us feel negative emotions, if we can do activities to experience more positive ones than negative ones, then we start to experience what Barbara Frederickson calls the broaden and build effect. So we're broadening our horizons, we become better at relationships, we start noticing more opportunities, we become more creative, we're better problem solvers. All these things are actually, as teachers and also for our students, are really, really important, as well as for anybody in life, really. And we're building our internal resources, such as resilience, for example, and then we experience those upward spirals of positive emotions. So the more we do stuff to experience positive emotions, the more of them we will experience. So it becomes a self-fulfilling activity, really. It just grows and grows. And there's also a little element there that she's added to the research at a later stage about the undo elements. So things like cortisol that build up in our system when we're stressed over a prolonged period of time and there's no outlet for that, that can actually impact on our immune system, on our physical well-being, our ability to fight simple things like coughs and colds, etc. That can actually be impacted on. But if we do this broaden and build effect through having more positive and negative emotions, the research indicates that actually we can undo some of those negative effects of negative emotions as well. So it's really important to do that. But yeah, all emotions have their place. It's just about the balance between them. So if we're going through a really rubbish time, we might just have to work a little bit harder at putting more positive stuff in, and it can be really simple stuff. So gratitude, as I say, any sort of strengths work can be really powerful. So spotting strengths in others, spotting strengths in yourself, focusing on certain strengths that you want to develop more and actively using them more. All of these things will increase your positive emotions and therefore have that benefit on well-being. But it can be something as simple as, even when you're in a virtual environment, making eye contact with someone and smiling. And when we are working in a world now where in corridors in schools we're going to be wearing face masks, in senior schools, for example, that eye contact is going to be more important than ever. If you're crossing the corridor at a 2-meter distance from somebody and all they can see is your eyes, then really make that eye contact in that little moment. It's what Barbara Frederickson calls micro moments of connection, and we can do an awful lot of those. It's just about sharing these tiny little moments where we just connect on a real one-to-one level with another human being. And that can be when we go into a shop and there might be a screen between us and the checkout assistant, but we can still connect. It's just a hello, it's just asking somebody how are you, and listening to the answer, really listening, all of those things.
Yeah, and I love that the micro moments of connection are increasingly more important, aren't they? Because there are so many physical barriers in between us that we're not used to, and it could be almost instinctive to withdraw from that and feel that somehow there's a threat. And especially in the school environment, it feels critically important to keep that connection and to keep, especially young people, but all of us across all staff, to feel safe and connected. And we're going through this together, you're not alone. And those micro moments, I love that, of connection and just checking in with people, smiling. Smiling, isn't that the most interesting signal to send to somebody that's okay?
Yes.
you know.
Yes, and even when you're wearing a face mask, you can see a smile in the eyes.
Yeah.
A genuine smile is a whole face activity. It's not just the mouth. So wearing a face mask doesn't stop the smile from being transmitted. And I think that's what we need to remember, you know, that we can still connect with people despite all the restrictions we have at the moment. And I think going back to the whole idea of strengths, there is so much we can do as a whole school staff to maybe even formalize the recognizing of strengths in each other. You know, why not create a virtual board that we contribute to of everybody's strengths, so that we know what strengths we have between us, you know. And when you have days when you think, oh, I don't know if I can do this, you know, this is so hard, you can look at that and go, wow, look at all the strengths we have between us, you know, and you can make connections between them. You can look at ways that you've demonstrated them. So this virtual mural can grow and grow and grow in terms of showing all the different ways that we're putting those strengths into action as daily reminders that actually, no matter what life throws at us, we have incredible resourcefulness within us. And when we work together as a team, that resourcefulness just multiplies, and we are able to overcome whatever this throws at us.
Yes, that's wonderful. It's a wonderful way of looking at it, because leaning on each other a little bit, and I don't mean kind of collapsing into each other's arms, that's not what I mean at all, but having this shared language of strengths, then you've got a framework for seeing where perhaps if you're feeling, even using the word hopeless, one day you're just feeling like you just don't have the strength to go on, but you know that somebody is that optimistic, hopeful person, just reaching out to them can be a lovely bridge to build and to connect, and can give you that support that you might be needing in that moment. It's a lovely way of looking at it.
Absolutely. If you know who the people are whose signature strengths are things like hope, then just having a conversation with one of those people can lift your day and renew your strength of hope. And equally, you know, some days we might feel really grotty and not feel particularly kind or kindly inclined. And we notice that in ourselves. So seeking out the people that we know are naturally very, very high on kindness as a strength can just give us a little bit of a boost again. You know, it rubs off all of these strengths, you know, like all things. We mingle with people, emotions, strengths, all of these things rub off on each other, and it works in person, and there's been plenty of research to show that actually emotions rub off on social media as well. So you know, we can really use that to, once we understand the language of strengths and the power of and the framework of them, we can really seek out interactions with people that support the strengths that we are looking to build at that particular point as well.
Yeah. And do you have the list of strengths? I see you referred to a little bit earlier when you looked at temperance, the group of temperance. Do you have them to hand that you could just read the list that you could share with our...
I just jotted down a few, but if you give me 2 seconds, I will have. So...
And well, don't worry if it's not. We can.
I've got them there. I've got them here. Okay. So your 24 strengths are so appreciation of beauty and excellence. These are alphabetical on the VIA site. So appreciation of beauty and excellence, bravery. We certainly need a lot of that at the moment, I think. Creativity, certainly need to be pushing that one to come up with creative solutions to make our schools both safe and still fantastic environments. And I know that there's lots of that going on. Curiosity, I love that one. It's one of my signature strengths. I just like to say I'm very nosy. And it's great because now I can say it's great. It's a character strength. Just embrace it. Fairness, forgiveness, gratitude, honesty, hope, humility, humour, judgment, kindness, leadership, love. That's I think usually it varies from time to time, but usually it's my top signature strength. Love of learning, perseverance, perspective, prudence, self-regulation, social intelligence, spirituality, teamwork, and zest. And I love that one.
Zest. What a great word.
Absolutely. Zest, vitality, energy, you know, and we all know people who are full of zest. And the interesting thing with strengths, actually, it's probably worth mentioning because they are great, but it's really important to sometimes also think about overuse of certain strengths, because we've only talked about practicing and developing them, but sometimes, and zest made me think about that because, you know, as teachers, we might all know kids that are full of zest, but sometimes, you know, it's time and place, and we might just need them to tone that zest down a little bit. And I've found that very interesting over the past few months, as I've had some really interesting conversations about strengths with my daughter. And actually, we started talking about strengths in people we love and strengths in people we love, but that sometimes irritate us an awful lot. And what we realized talking about that is that sometimes the very reason why we might find some people really annoying is because they're overusing certain strengths. And sometimes they might be overusing leadership because they want to be in control of everything, or they might be overusing love because they love you so much that they just want to kind of tell you how to lead your life because they know best how to do that and how to keep you well and safe. So once you start looking at that, it actually helps you to look more kindly on the people that might irritate you and on why they behave in certain ways. So understanding strengths can be really useful in that sense as well, from a relationships perspective, that if you understand people's strengths, you can also understand why sometimes they can be overbearing, annoying, controlling, whatever, because sometimes it is just an overuse of strengths. And when we're looking at that for ourselves, and when we're looking at that in terms of the relationships we have with our colleagues, for example, it's sometimes quite good to go a bit introspective and think, well, do I perhaps overuse certain strengths at times? And is that why there are sometimes conflicts with other people? So can I just tone that one down at work a little bit? You know, is there another strength I can use a bit more in its place? And of course, in our work with children in schools as well, that's something really useful to help children see and recognize where sometimes they might be overusing certain strengths. One example, again, my youngest daughter, you know, when it comes to perseverance, for example, she's got a lot better at that. But when she was at school, particularly, a lot of her teachers were talking to her about, they weren't using the language of strengths, but that's what they were doing, really. They were saying, you're overusing perseverance. You're that focused on your goal. You're that focused on what you need to achieve that you're never, ever taking a break. And you need to actually balance that with a bit of self-regulation, which is the other way to what we quite often say to kids about self-regulation, you know, a bit more work and less play. But in her case, it was the other way around, you know, put a bit more play in there and a bit less work. And so it's taking that perseverance and going, well, it's a bit too high. Let's put a bit more self-regulation in, and maybe let's put a bit more zest in there, you know, in terms of fun and bringing those. So understanding how you are using your strengths and how your pupils are using the strengths can also help you balance, you know, give them the vocabulary and the tools to balance them out sometimes as well.
Well, our time is up already. I never ceases to amaze me how quickly we get through this time. Frederica, it would be a good opportunity to tell people about your new book. It was just launched.
Yes.
So congratulations on that. So tell us about your book and where people can find it.
Thank you very much. Yes, my latest book is called For Flourishing's Sake, and you can really hear that with as much passion and slight outrage as you want, because it really comes from a place of, for flourishing's sake, what are we doing to our kids, you know, and that's without taking even COVID into account, but all the more important now with the pandemic that we're facing. It's coming from a place of, what are schools actually there for? What did we become teachers for? What is our purpose as educators? And I think that many of us would say that our purpose is not just to come out with grades at the end of it for our kids. You know, it's about educating whole, flourishing human beings that can function well and thrive in the world whilst they're at school and also beyond that. And it's not just about the kids either. It's about everybody associated with the school environment. So it's the teachers, it's all the staff in school, it's the parents, it's the wider community around school. So what I did with that book is basically I looked at, I took my model of whole school positive education that I developed during my master's to look at sort of some of the key elements that are required. And as I interviewed educators from all over the world, I drew out the stories around that and noticed that indeed those elements were actually present all over the place in practice. And I wanted to show that you can really focus on well-being whilst, of course, making sure that the academic stuff is there and is rigorous, because the two go hand in hand. But I wanted to make sure that you can do and have this focus on well-being no matter what kind of school you are and whereabouts in the world you are. So it's not just primary schools, just secondary schools, or just, as quite often that's been seen as being the case, because that's where a lot of this kind of movement on positive education started, which is very high-end independent schools. But I've shown in the book that actually it's happening all over. It's happening in tiny little rural schools in Oxfordshire. It's happening in schools that are really strapped for cash, massive 3-4 entry primary schools that are strapped for cash. It's happening everywhere, and it's happening across all sectors. And I've even shown some examples of higher education to show that really it is the whole age range. So what the book does, hopefully, is give you lots of ideas of bringing in whole school well-being and positive education, but also the lots of little ways. So the lone teacher that brought in a kindness project on his own and transformed kindness in his school. So it's all the big and little ways that you can do that. So it's called For Flourishing's Sake, and it is available everywhere. It's at all the major book retailers all over the world, really. So wherever you like to buy your books from, you'll find it, both ebook and paperback.
Wonderful. And you make a really important point there when you said what one teacher can do by introducing a small, talking about kindness, or bringing in kindness project. So for people who are watching or listening to this podcast, they might be thinking, what can I do in my school environment? Well, you can actually have a big impact by following some of these things and introducing some of these ideas into your school. So absolutely. I really love that message that as an individual, you can have a strong influence in your school.
Definitely, because quite often we can feel powerless if we're not in a position of making the decisions. Yeah. And even if you are a decision maker, you might think, well, I don't have the time, the resources, whatever, to do everything. But do something. Doing something is better than doing nothing. I mean, yes, it's wonderful when you're in a school that's being built from scratch, built on positive psychology and character education, and you can do it from the ground up. But not everybody, and in fact, many people aren't in that position. But actually, you can start with little initiatives and just grow it, and it has a snowball effect.
Wonderful. Frederica, where can people find you? There's lots of places they can reach out to you.
Yes, I'm all over social media. So the Twitter account I'm mostly on is my personal / professional one, but as opposed to one associated with one of my businesses. So that's Frederika_R. But you can also find me if you go to happiness-speaker.co.uk. That's my website, and you'll find all my details. And my not-for-profit, which is Educate to Flourish, is educatetoflourish.org.uk, and you'll find all my details on there as well.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for your time today. It's been wonderful talking to you and hearing from you. Congratulations again on your book.
Thank you.
And thank you very much for joining us, Frederica.
Well, thank you very much for having me, Maria.
Thanks so much for watching. Check out our website, pursuitwellbeing.com, for information about our 5-step wellbeing action plan for teachers and school leaders. There's a link in the description below. Or take our free teacher anxiety quiz at teacheranxietyquiz.com. The quiz only takes a couple of minutes, and you'll get a better understanding of where you are today, plus tips to immediately feel better. I'd love you to connect with me on Twitter at Maria Brosnan. And if you enjoyed the show, please hit the subscribe button. If you feel inspired, give us a thumbs up, comment, and share it with your friends.